Okay, let's see what happens. But even the mighty three could not last forever against the enemy. The Bag-Jagderags broke through the fence, and in the battle, Long Arrow was knocked down with a spear in his chest. Bumpo and the doctor fought on for another half hour side by side. The quiet, kindly little doctor was dealing out whacks heard a mile away. Bumpo was a crazy man come to life. No one dared come within yards of him. But a small stone struck him in the center of his forehead, and down went the second of the three. John Dolittle fought on alone. Suddenly another length of fence crashed down, and the enemy poured in like a flood. "Run for your lives," the Popsipetels cried. "The war is lost." I thought the doctor and I would be trampled to death, but then we heard the most terrifying noise, the sound of millions of parrots screeching together angrily. Polynesia had brought the black parrot army in the nick of time. The black parrots were coal black except for a scarlet beak and a streak of red in their wings and tails. On command from Polynesia, they set upon the enemy. 4 parrots attacked each Bag-Jagderag, clipping snips out of their ears. It won the war for the Popsipetels. Howling pitifully, the Bag-Jagderags tried to flee, and when the birds were done with them, the Bag-Jagderags' ears looked like postage stamps. It did no permanent harm, and later it became the tribal mark of the Bag-Jagderags. Scalloped ears were proof that a man had fought in the Great War, and that is how the tribe came to be known as the ragged-eared Bag-Jagderags. As soon as the enemy was gone, the doctor attended to the wounded. There were few serious injuries. Long Arrow was the worst off, but after the doctor had washed his wound and got him to bed, he said he felt much better. Bumpo was badly stunned, but otherwise unhurt. The doctor picked up his high hat, which had been knocked off in the fight, dusted it carefully, and put it on. Then he called to Polynesia and told her to have the black parrots guard the enemy all night. "Tomorrow we will arrange terms of peace, and we will do it in the city of Bag-Jagderag," he said. The admiring Popsipetels cheered. The war was over. The next day we set out in canoes for the far end of the island. It took 25 hours to reach the city of Bag-Jagderag. The doctor's visit was short. Long Arrow remained at the village, still too weak to travel. The doctor brought a young Indian boy whom he was teaching to speak English. Between the two of them, he was sure he would get his point across to the Bag-Jagderags. And when the doctor went ashore, the Indians were in a humble mood. The doctor, Bumpo, the young Indian, and I went straight to the palace of the chief. Important tribesmen stood at the foot of the palace steps, hands outstretched in friendship to the angry doctor who marched right past them. He stood at the top of the steps of the palace and gave a long speech to the Indians. He called them cowards, thieves, and bullies, and said that he had not decided whether to have the black parrots drive them all into the sea to rid the land of them. A cry for mercy rose from the crowd at this. They all fell to their knees and said that they would do whatever he asked. The doctor called for one of their scribes who did picture writing, and on the stone walls of the palace he made the scribe write what has become known as the Peace of the Parrots. It was very long. The main point was that there was to be no more fighting, and that both tribes promised to help one another in case of corn famine or other distress. The Bag-Jagderags were shocked. They had expected from the doctor's angry face that he would order many people killed and that the rest made into slaves. His orders changed their fear to admiration. They asked him to stay with them and promised him great riches. He held up his hand for silence. "No man would wish to be your guest until you proved by your deeds that you are honest," he said. "Be true to the terms of the peace, and from yourselves shall come good government and prosperity. Farewell." He turned, and we followed him back to the canoes. The doctor made a great impression on the Bag-Jagderags, and their change of heart was sincere. In fact, his speech from the palace steps probably had more impact than anything else he did on Spider Monkey Island. We went ashore about halfway back to Popsipetel and explored the central part of the island for a few days. The Indian paddlers took us up in the mountains to a region called Whispering Rocks overhanging the sea. It was like a great basin in the mountains, and in the center rose a table of rock with an ivory chair upon it. The mountains rose around it like theater seats, except at one narrow end which opened to the view of the sea. Here's a picture. I want to make sure you can see it. The doctor asked why it was called Whispering Rocks, and the guide said that no matter where you stood, if you just whispered, your words echoed throughout the whole theater. They took us up into the great bowl to try it, explaining that this was where the king was crowned when the Popsipetels were one people and owned all of Spider Monkey Island. They pointed out an enormous hanging stone perched on the edge of the volcano's crater. There was a legend that when the greatest of all Popsipetels kings would be crowned, the hanging stone would tumble to the center of the earth. The doctor wanted a closer look. He walked to the stone, which was as big as a cathedral. Underneath was a black hole that appeared endless. Stubbins, the doctor said, remember when the porpoises told us about the air chamber in the center of the island? I nodded. The doctor said that the stone was heavy enough that if it did fall, the air would escape and the island would sink. Wouldn't everyone be drowned? I asked. No, it depends on the depth of the sea. It could go down 100 feet, but there would still be much land left above the water, he said. We climbed back into our canoes and headed to the village. We were surprised to find that the whole village had been up all night. The elders of the tribe were voting on a new chief, and the name would be announced at midday. The doctor went to check on Long Arrow, who was making good progress. We went to our house, ate some breakfast, and all lay down for a rest. Moments after our weary heads touched the pillows, we were all asleep. Music awakened us. The bright noonday sunlight streamed in our door. A band was playing outside. We got up and looked out. Our house was surrounded by everyone in Popsipetel. They were dressed up in bright beads, gaudy feathers, and colorful blankets. The people sang or played painted wooden whistles or drums made from skins. The election results were announced, Polynesia said. And who is the new chief? The doctor asked. You are, Polynesia said quietly. I gasped the doctor. Well, of all things, you're the one. And they've changed your name, too. Dolittle wasn't a proper name for a man who did so much. So now you are Jong Think-A-Lot. How do you like it? But I don't want to be chief, he said irritably. You'll have a tough time getting out of it now, she said. You've been elected the king of the whole Spider Monkey Island. The Bag-Jagderags insisted they and their lands be united with the Popsipetels so you could be king to both. Bother it, I don't want to be king, groaned the doctor. I should think, doctor, you'd feel rather proud, I said. I wish I had a chance to be a king. Oh, it sounds grand, he said, but you can't take up responsibilities and then just drop them again when you feel like it. I have my own work to do. If I'm made king of the Popsipetels, that's the end of me as a naturalist. I'd be too busy for anything. Look, said Polynesia, here comes the headman to announce your election. Hurry up and get your boots laced. The crowd at our door suddenly parted, making a long lane down which a handsome old Indian with a wrinkled face came carrying an incredibly beautiful wooden crown. Behind him were 8 strong Indians bearing a chair with long handles underneath to carry it. Kneeling down on one knee, his head bent almost to the ground, the old man addressed the doctor. O mighty one, he said, great are your deeds, kind is your heart, and your wisdom is deeper than the sea. Our people need you. Our old enemies, the Bag-Jagderags, have become our brothers and friends because of you. I bring to you the sacred crown of Popsipetel, which since ancient days has rested on no kingly brow. We are bidden by the united voices of the peoples to carry you to Whispering Rocks. There you may be crowned king of all the moving land. The Indians never even considered that John Dolittle might say no. My friends, he said, I am not worthy of this great honor. Among your own brave men, you must find many better fitted to lead you. I thank you for this compliment, but do you think of me for such high duties which I could not possibly fulfill? The old man repeated the doctor's words to the crowd of people behind him. They shook their heads and wouldn't move an inch. The old man turned back to the doctor. You are the chosen one, he said. They will have none other. Suddenly a flash of hope crossed the doctor's perplexed face. I'll go and see Long Arrow, he whispered. Perhaps he will know some way to get me out of this. Asking to be excused, he left and hurried off to Long Arrow's house. I followed him. We found our big friend lying on a grass bed outside his home so he could witness the event. Long Arrow, said the doctor, speaking quickly in the eagle tongue. I come to you for help. These men would make me king. All the great work I hope to do as a naturalist would have to go undone. Speak with them and persuade their kind hearts that this is unwise. Long Arrow raised himself on his elbow. "Oh, kindly one," he said, "I can do nothing. These people have their hearts set on you as their king. If I interfered, they would drive me from the land and crown you anyway. You must be a king, if only for a while. Maybe later we will get a plan to relieve you of the burden of the crown, but for now you must be the king." Sadly, the doctor turned away, and there behind him stood the old Indian holding the crown in his wrinkled hands, the royal litter waiting at his elbow. With reverence, the bearers motioned towards the chair, inviting the doctor to get in. For a moment I thought the doctor would run away, but the crowd was thick. A band of whistles and drums suddenly started a processional march. Almost in tears, John Dolittle stepped slowly onto the litter and sat down, muttering, "I don't want to be king." Long Arrow called farewell. "May good fortune ever stand within the shadow of your throne," he said. The procession formed to leave the village. The crowd began hurrying in the direction of the mountains to make sure that they got good seats in the giant theater where the crowning ceremony would take place. Buppo, Chi-Chi, Polynesia, Jip, and I finally reached the dizzy edge of the Whispering Rocks and looked down. Every man, woman, and child on the island, including Long Arrow, what had been carried on his sickbed, was there. That doesn't make sense, you guys. Every man, woman, and child on the island, including Long Arrow, who had been carried on his sickbed, was there. Okay, I get it now. Not a sound disturbed the solemn silence. Chills ran up and down my spine. Accompanied by the old man, the doctor walked up to the throne and sat down. The old man turned around, looking up at the people. He spoke in a quiet, even voice. Every word was heard in the farthest corner of Whispering Rocks. He recited the names of past postcipital kings and spoke of the great deeds of the soon-to-be king. The old man respectfully removed the doctor's battered high hat. He was about to put it on the ground when Doctor grabbed it and put it in his lap. The sacred crown was placed on John Dolittle's head. It did not fit very well, but it looked splendid. "Men of Postcipital," the man said, "behold your elected king. Are you content?" And then the voice of the people broke loose. "Zhang, Zhang," they shouted. "Long live King Zhang." Suddenly the old man pointed to the highest mountain from which the hanging stone slowly toppled into the heart of the volcano. "See ye, men of the moving land," the old man cried. "The king of our kings is crowned this day." The doctor stood as he saw the stone fall and expectantly looked toward the sea. "He's thinking of the air chamber," Bumpo said in my ear. It took a full minute for the stone to fall to the bottom of the volcano. We heard the muffled, distant thud, and then the hissing of escaping air. The doctor's face was tense with anxiety. He sat on the throne staring out at the blue water. Soon we felt the island slowly sinking beneath us. The sea crept inland, and the shores went down 1, 10, 20, 50, 100 feet. And then it stopped. Spider Monkey Island had come to rest on the bottom of the Atlantic. The entire village of Popsipetel had disappeared, but no one was hurt. Everyone was at the coronation of King Zhang. The doctor told us later that the shouts of the people must have caused the rock to fall. But in Popsipetel history, it is believed to this day that when King Zhang sat upon the throne, his mighty weight was so great that the very island sank down to honor him and never moved again. Zhang Think-A-Lot did not sit on the throne and have people bow down to him all day. Instead, he was the busiest person I've ever seen, from early in the morning until late at night, 7 days a week. First, there was the new town to be built. An entire new city of Popsipetel was planned with great care in a beautiful location at the mouth of the large river. The doctor showed the Indians what sewers were. He dammed a stream high in the hills and made a large lake as water supply for the town. The Indians had never seen any of these things before. Many sicknesses were prevented by proper drainage and pure drinking water. John Dolittle searched the mountains and found iron and copper mines. He taught the Indians how the metals could be melted and made into knives, plows, water pipes, and other things. The doctor also tried to do away with the pomp of being a king. He said if he must be king, he would be a democratic one who was friendly with his subjects. His plans for the city of New Popsipetel did not include a palace, but rather a cottage on the edge of the town for himself. That was where the Indians got involved. They were used to kings ruling in a grand manner and insisted that he have the most magnificent palace ever built. 1,000 servants were on hand at the royal palace night and day. A royal canoe was made of polished mahogany, 70 feet long, inlaid with mother of pearl, and paddled by the 100 strongest men on the island. The palace gardens covered a square mile. Even in his dress, the doctor had to be formal, elegant, and uncomfortable. His beloved battered high hat was put in a closet. State robes were worn on all occasions. Even when he managed to sneak off for a short natural history trip, he never dared wear his old clothes. He had to chase his butterflies with a crown upon his head and a scarlet cloak flying behind him in the wind. Here's a little picture of it. Easiness, huh? There was no end to the tasks he had to perform and the questions he had to decide. And in the afternoon, he taught school. Grown-ups as well as children came to learn. Bumpo and I helped with the teaching, but the doctor taught classes in astronomy, farming, and baby care himself. The Indians loved the classes. The doctor had to take groups of 5,000 or 6,000 at a time and use a megaphone to make himself heard. Even though he didn't want to be king, John Dolittle made a very good one. Under the reign of Jean Think-a-Lot, Popsipetel was probably the best ruled state in the history of the world. The doctor's birthday came around when we had been on the island a little more than 6 months. It became a great public holiday. In honor of the events, the people of the island made a tablet of ebony wood 10 feet high. It portrayed a picture history of the great events in the life of King Jean and included verses composed by the court poet. Bumpo and I had a beautiful suite of rooms in the royal palace, which Polynesia, Jip, and Chi-Chi shared with us. Officially, Bumpo was Minister of the Interior, and I was First Lord of the Treasury. One night after supper, when the doctor was in town visiting a newborn baby, we all sat around the big table in Bumpo's reception room. We did this every evening. It was kind of a cabinet meeting. Tonight, instead of talking of affairs of the state, we were talking about England. When do you suppose the doctor intends to move on from here? Jip asked. Know what I think? Polynesia said. I believe the doctor has given up even thinking of going home. Good Lord, cried Bumpo. No. Shh, Polynesia said. He's coming. Late as usual, she added. Poor man, how does he does work. Chi-Chi, get his pipe and tobacco and his dressing gown. The doctor looked serious as he came into the room. Warily, he took off his crown and hung it on a peg behind the door. He changed from the royal cloak to his dressing gown, dropped into his chair, and filled his pipe, sighing. Then he sat silent, staring at the ceiling through a cloud of smoke. At last I said, Doctor, we were wondering when you would be starting home again. Tomorrow will be 7 months on the island. The doctor sat forward in his chair, looking uncomfortable. I was going to speak to you about that myself this evening, he said. I'm afraid it would be impossible for me to leave this work now. These people have come to rely on me for a great number of things. He thought a moment and then went on in a quieter, sadder voice. I would like to continue my voyages and my natural history work, and I miss Puddleby as much as any of you, but I cannot close my eyes to what might happen if I leave these people and run away. They like me, they trust me, and I like them. I must stick to the work I took up when I assumed the crown. For good? Bumpo asked. Your whole life? I don't know, the doctor said at last. There was a sad silence, followed by a knock at the door. The doctor put on his crown and cloak. Come in, he called. A footman bowed at the entrance. Oh, kindly one, there is a traveler who wishes to see you. Did you ask the traveler's name? Yes, your majesty. It is Long Arrow, the son of Golden Arrow. Long Arrow, cried the doctor. How splendid. Show him in at once. I'm so glad, he continued, turning to us. I've missed Long Arrow terribly. He's such a good man to have around. It had been 5 months since Long Arrow had left the island in a canoe for Brazil. And when the door swung open again, there stood our friend, a smile on his strong, bronzed face. Behind him, 2 porters carried loads packed in Indian palm matting. Oh, kindly one, Long Arrow said, I bring you as promised the treasures of the labor of my life. The packages were opened. Inside were many smaller packages. They were carefully laid out in rows. Upon the table there were plants, flowers, fruits, leaves, roots, nuts, beans, honeys, gums, bark, seeds, bees, and a few kind of insects. The study of plants, called botany, never interested me very much, but as Long Arrow explained his collection, I became fascinated. Soon I was totally absorbed by the wonders he had brought. These, he said, talking up a little packet of big seeds. He was taking up a little packet of big seeds, or what I call laughing beans. While Long Arrow's back was turned, Bumpo popped 3 of the beans into his mouth and swallowed them. Alas, said Long Arrow when he discovered what Bumpo had done. He should not have eaten more than a quarter of one seed. Let us hope he does not die laughing. The bean's effect on Bumpo was extraordinary. In minutes he broke into a broad smile, and then he began to giggle. Finally he burst into such hearty roars of laughter we had to carry him out and put him to bed. The doctor said Bumpo could have died from laughter had he not been so strong. All night he gurgled happily in his sleep, and when we woke him next morning he rolled out of bed still chuckling. When we returned to the reception room, we saw red roots that, when made into soup with sugar and salt, caused people to dance with great speed. He asked if we wanted to try them, but we politely refused. After seeing Bumpo, we were afraid of any more experiments. There was no end to the strange and useful things Long Arrow had collected. Oil that would make hair grow in one night, an orange as big as a pumpkin raised in his own garden in Peru, black honey that would put you to sleep and make you awaken fresh in the morning, a nut to make the voice beautiful for singing, waterweed that stopped cuts from bleeding, moss that cured snakebite, and lichen to prevent seasickness. The doctor was terribly excited. As Long Arrow dictated, he wrote down in his notebook the name and description of each item. Stubbins, he said, his voice sounding more the way it did in Puddleby. There are things here that in the hands of skilled druggists could make a vast difference in medicine and chemistry. Miranda was right. Long Arrow is a great naturalist. Someday I must get these things to England. But when, he added sadly, when? You guys, we got a break, and then we'll finish.